Hello, welcome back to the channel. And I'm very excited that this is the first in an interview series where I speak to experts about green tech, and in particular, the research going into current green tech. So before I continue and welcome my guests for today, please hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, as this will increase the channel membership, and that will really help promote the channel. If you want to financially support the channel, there is a join button and you can pay £1.99 a month, and this will give you benefits such as early viewing of videos, emojis, fast response to comments, and that sort of thing. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, I will probably be setting up a Patreon membership in the near future. So I'm very excited to welcome to Everything is Black or White Except Green Tech, Dr. Daniel Jones, who is currently a researcher at Swansea University and will be moving to new pastures in a couple of months to a company that I can't pronounce the name, so if you can do it.
So it's called Galera. They essentially make sodium-ion battery materials, and they're based in Capilli, just north of Cardiff. So yeah, really exciting for me.
So as you can tell, Dan is an expert on battery technology, but also on hydrogen technology as well. So this is probably where we are going to start. So if you've been watching this channel for a while, they will know that my opinion on hydrogen is it's meant to be the technology of the future, which has been for the past 70 odd years, and probably will remain.
Yeah, I think it depends on what you're using it for is the problem. So my opinion of hydrogen is it's got certain applications that I think it would be particularly good for. The main one where I think it can supersede electric cars is long haul. So long haul, obviously electric cars are taking over now, or that's the plan anyway. But for long distances, they still struggle with the capacity. So, you know, a lorry trying to go 2,000 miles on diesel can't do that on an electric car. It's sort of limited to sort of 500 miles. And again, for a lorry, it can take an hour to charge, 2 hours to charge. So you're asking a lorry driver to do that 2,000 miles with 4 charges. You know, it's going to extend their journey by about a third of a day. Hydrogen, you can get much closer to, first of all, to what diesel can achieve. But secondly, it's going to charge a lot quicker. It's a lot quicker to fill a tank. You know, you can fill a lorry in about 10, 20 minutes. And that will only come down as we increase the speed. In theory, you should be able to fill hydrogen faster than a liquid fuel like petrol or diesel, provided you have the infrastructure to do so. Whereas batteries are always going to be limited by how quickly you can charge the batteries. So,
but also the other technology is available. So things like the new, like the Tesla trucks, which have the 800 volt architecture, you only have to be able to charge those at 500 kilowatts. You might be able to get them up to the megawatt eventually, but it still takes a long time. And so with every 4 hours, lorry driver has to legally stop and take a 45 minute break. And unless, depends on the size of your battery and also the weight of the truck, you start getting to a point where the time that they have to extra wait to charge to build a hydrogen. I think what's the other thing that would be interesting with hydrogen, other than just long haul, is industrial. So things like if you were quarrying or anything else that involves sort of being in a small location.
And you can have a big tank on site. I think that's the thing. So using it for industrial applications, standalone power, I think hydrogen's really got the scope for it to be used. And of course, it's much easier to recycle a hydrogen tank than it is a big battery, you know. So in terms of sustainability and recyclability, I think hydrogen has got a lot to offer that batteries maybe don't, especially with lithium ion, where we're sort of having these huge amounts of cobalt, nickel, and things like this. So the cobalt is things. Yes, true, it is. Well, I'll say actually that's one of the things with sodium ion. Sodium ion, you don't need cobalt.
There's no fire retardant.
There's no fire retardant, but sodium ion batteries are inherently safer. Also, so the evidence suggests they're less prone to thermal runaway. So one of the reasons that we keep seeing electric cars catching fire is lithium ion has this thermal runaway problem. If you try and charge it too quickly, for example, it just generally gets too hot. the materials can run away and you get these reactions which eventually cause fire. This can happen with sodium ion, but it's less, it's more resistant to it. And the operating temperatures for sodium ion battery are about 20 degrees above and below those of lithium. So it is safer in theory, although it's still ongoing research. So
I should point out that electric cars still don't have the same or the same rate of catching fires as something like petrol or diesel.
They don't. But at the same time, it's easier to put out a petrol car when it does catch fire.
Not about all the time.
Yeah,
I'm thinking more about things like lithium batteries and e-bikes, especially where the battery management system isn't as advanced as in a car. Those can really cause.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
And I suppose going back to the hydrogen, things like long haul, if you can have special depots where you can fuel, or in the case of a mine where you can if you have a large water source, and you can outlet some solar panels to create hydrogen cheap, then that certainly has an advantage. You don't have to ship in. You don't have to ship in huge amounts of electricity. You don't have to ship in gas, gasoline.
Exactly.
Diesel. So you start getting some advantages there, and also you just get the water back out again, which in theory you collect. And then
Exactly. It could be like a circular thing, and that's actually Swansea Uni are doing a lot of projects with this, where they have with factories. There's a place down in Clyde called Valley. It's like a nickel refinery. They're using on-site panels to produce their own hydrogen for part of their industrial process. So using it as an industrial feedstock is one of the major things as well. Not just for power, but also for, replacing where you might use natural gas in your industrial process. You can now use hydrogen. And that's something where I think electricity not always can be used. Sometimes you need to have a flammable gas in the process. So that can be used there.
Yeah, I suppose it's that with the hydrogen is pretty energy dense per mass, but of course it does take quite a large volume as well. So
yes, it does. So you compress it to about 800 bar normally in a hydrogen car. So you think that a normal gas bottle that we would use in the lab is about 200 bar. So you think that it's about 4 times the pressure inside a hydrogen car than you have in a typical lab setting. And that's just to get the energy density to compete with, say, petrol, because as I say, it is a gas.
And obviously we have to talk about making hydrogen, which then comes on to a bit of your research. So again, if you've been watching the channel for a while, or you watch another channel that is similar, you'll come across the terms green hydrogen and grey hydrogen. So hydrogen is a fantastic sort of storage of energy. If you have excess electricity from wind turbines or solar, which is what they do in Spain, convert it into hydrogen and you can store it long term, provided you don't have particularly leaky containers. Problem with grey hydrogen is that you need vast amount of electricity to do that. So if you're still relying on a coal power station or gas running for this year's, or the other source of hydrogen is from the petrochemical industry as a waste byproduct. But going on to, so what I'll do is I'll link these papers down below. So we've got a paper here that Dan worked on, and where is the date of this one? On what journal was it published in?
This one I think might be 2017 from memory.
So this is a paper published in 2017 in the International Journal of Hydrogen Energy, and it's called Minimising the Ohmic Resistance of an Alkaline Electrolysis Cell through Effective Cell Design. Who says that the cell exists?
The longest title you can.
You've lowered the resistance of a alkali solution in a cell.
Yeah. This is essentially to do with making what we call electrolyzer. So this is a way of producing hydrogen using what we call water splitting. So essentially you have 2 electrodes, you have your water in between, you have your ions, so either acid protons or OH minus for the alkaline in this case, to improve conductivity between the 2 electrodes. And essentially you split the water, so one electrode you're producing oxygen and the other electrode you're producing hydrogen. And you can collect those together and end up, you can use both actually. You often use oxygen for water purification, so the water boards will use them, and hydrogen obviously we're using the fuel. So one of the key things is actually separating the two gases. So what we normally do is we have a membrane between the two electrodes so that we don't get intermixing, because if you mix the hydrogen oxygen, you got an explosive mixture. So you want to get your high purity hydrogen. So this is a big problem with electrolyzers generally. Now, most electrolyzers actually use acidic conditions because they're more efficient than alkaline. The caveat with that is that you have to typically use platinum in your electrodes, especially the hydrogen evolving electrode, and that obviously increases the cost of the electrolysis. So to bring the cost down, what we generally do is what we've been working on is using alkaline conditions where we can use much cheaper electrode materials. We do compromise on efficiency; they're never going to be as efficient as the acidic counterparts, but we can use cheap materials, so the cost per kilowatt hour will be, or the cost per litre of hydrogen, say, will be lower. Now, this paper is all about basically reducing the gap between the two electrodes to what we call a zero gap situation, where it is literally electrode membrane with no other gap, essentially. Now, there are issues with that, of course, because we've got the membrane butt up against the electrode. There's no room for the bubbles to escape and things, so you can get gas trapping, which then limits the efficiency. So it's all to do with basically getting that to work. The advantage on a zero gap is that you can essentially reduce the resistance between the two electrodes to the minimum possible value. So then you can maximize efficiency because you've got a low resistance cell.
So basically, you're maximising the voltage.
You're maximising and you're minimising the resistive losses in the process.
So by minimising the resistance, you take the effect of the voltage on each plate.
Yeah, that's right. So you're minimising your essentially your voltage drop between the two electrodes that you want to minimise, because that effectively adds what we call no potential to reactions, and that's just lost energy. That's energy that you're never going to turn into hydrogen.
You get like it's basically lightning spark.
Essentially, yeah, and essentially what you want to do is, as I say, we can't compete with acid electrolysis, which can normally use. So acid electrolyzers can achieve an efficiency of about 70–75%. You're below that with alkaline, but we're just trying different methods to sort of maximize the efficiency while still using these low cost materials. And I think that's the idea with this.
So that's been you want to, if you are having to use the energy, even if it's a cell, you still want to maximize the amount of hydrogen coming through, and also try and keep the cost as low as possible, because it's still going to be used as a industry, it's still going to be a business at the end of the day.
Exactly, and even if it's less efficient, the idea is that we can just, if the materials are so much cheaper, and we say we want to produce a litre of hydrogen per hour, just fucking numbers, we'll just make the electrolyzer bigger, right? Okay, it's less efficient per unit area, but if it's 100 times cheaper than an acid equivalent, we can just make it bigger and compete that way. So
the acid, that's going to affect the actual container you can put in as well. Because if you're using a high concentration acid, you're going to have problems with your metals.
Well, that's it. So this is one of the reasons you have to use platinum. Well, the platinum is the main reason we're using the platinum is for the hydrogen evolution reaction in particular. It's got what we call very lower potential, so it's a very good catalyst for the hydrogen evolution reaction. Other metals also work, but they require this extra energy barrier to be overcome. So this is why platinum is usually used for the hydrogen evolution side. For the oxygen evolution side, you can use other materials. It's the hydrogen side that they really struggle with. But you are right, the materials also need to withstand the really high acidic environments, and also the membrane. So one of the biggest problems is the membrane. So membranes often will degrade in these strongly acidic environments. So with the alkaline, although these strongly alkaline conditions can also degrade materials, it turns out you can actually use cheaper membranes as well that you wouldn't get away with in the acidic environments. So there are some advantages there as well.
Also, does the alkaline also act as more of a surfactant on the surface to keep your membrane actually clean, so it can foul the membrane?
I suppose so. I'll admit that's something I don't know too much about, but yeah, I suppose that's a good point, because they do. You're right. They do. These OH minus do like binding to things, don't they?
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't like to say top of my head, but yeah.
I have to admit, I know nothing about technology. Really don't be good as a scientist. What do you? So, which will actually just say what how me and Dan know each other. So we started our PhDs together back in 2012.
2011, I think. Well, then 2011, yeah.
And also, both of us worked on zinc oxide. So you went down the route of
Gas sensing,
gas,
the gas detection using zinc oxide,
So Dan, what actually do you classify yourself? Are you a physicist? Are you?
I'm a physicist by background, I did my degree in physics.
Which was technically natural sciences.
Yeah, it was a bachelor's in natural sciences, and then I went into my master's in physics. So natural science, and I think the advantage of doing natural sciences is we do it chemistry and material science as well. So although I do think myself as a physicist, I would say probably you're the same. You did a physics background, right? But
yeah, I know do engineering.
You do engineering, but I think it all kind of becomes. I always say that no matter if you're a physicist or a chemist, you're probably going to end up doing a lot of chemistry. And this is the thing. But I don't really consider myself a chemist in the sense that a proper chemist, in my view, will be very good at making new experiments up. A bit like a proper chef will make recipes up, right?
Yeah.
Whereas a good cook can follow a recipe accurately, and I feel that's what I am.
So you're a chemical engineer.
I'm a chemical engineer. Yeah, exactly. I can efficiently and properly follow a recipe, and maybe tweak things a little bit, like I'll add a bit more salt here. But I think the really talented chemists can actually come up with something from scratch. If that makes sense.
And they can understand the effect of it on the physical world, which is your physics chemistry.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, exactly.
So this is the idea of multidisciplinary stuff, which it's one of those ideas that you sort of throughout your education, you specialise down to a subject, and then eventually then broaden back out.
Well, this is it. You end up. It's hard to define sometimes what you are, isn't it, when you're in the research world, because it's a bit of physics, a bit of chemistry. It might be a bit of biology, you know. Not for me.
Dark side.
It's not for me.
Yeah, that would be sort of ethics in that case.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, this was just so hopefully you find this interesting, just about how you can. Again, you'll see many channels that talk about just electrolysis and just how apply electric current to a solution and split it apart. But there's a little bit more involved.
Yeah, but essentially, I mean, you even could do it in school sometimes. It's just two electrodes, and essentially, you run it at these voltages beyond what they call the water splitting voltage, where you can get the two reactions happening. So yeah, it's essentially the setup is very similar to a battery in that respect, two electrodes and electrolyte. So yeah.
And then once we've got the hydrogen, we have to think about using it. So, I remember watching something to one of the parliamentary channels. And it was Jacob Rees-Mogg, so you can know what that is. It was when he was business secretary or something, and he was talking about how hydrogen should replace the gas. So we use butane.
Like natural gas.
Coming into the houses. And that's going to leak out of all the pipe work. You're still not producing the carbon emissions, which is better, but you're still, as far as home domestic gas is concerned, probably some of the best idea.
I think the thing is there are misconceptions of hydrogen. So the leakage is an issue. You are right. Hydrogen is very leaky. It likes to leak through metals. Yeah. In fact, it can leak into some metals and brittle them. But that's less a problem with the sort of metals used in the pipework. But actually, a lot of the pipeworks now are being replaced with plastics that are impervious to hydrogen. So it would actually be a simpler case than it would have been, say, 50 years ago to change over. But you are right. There are sort of discussions about leakage rates and things like this. In terms of safety, though, the reason everyone thinks that hydrogen is so unsafe is because of things like the Hindenburg disaster.
But I also find really odd because you see the pictures from that or the video and it's in black and white.
Yeah,
hydrogen's blue, so you should get the thing. So why don't you see the flames?
Well, that's it. That's actually an issue with hydrogen. So pure hydrogen actually produces mainly ultraviolet flames, so you can't really see them. So this is an issue. There's even talk about, do you know the way you put amines and things into the natural gas so you can smell it because it's otherwise an odorless gas. There are ideas about putting chemicals or whatever things into the hydrogen, seeding it just so that you can get a colour to your flame. Now, actually, hydrogen is produced from electrolysis. typically will have a bluer flame and actually a bit of an orange in it normally. The orange actually comes from the sodium from the electrolyzer. So actually green hydrogen tends to produce, unless you've really gone to some extreme efforts to filter out these additives, will generally produce a bluish or orangey flame. But you're right, if you've got bottled hydrogen with no impurities, it'll be an invisible flame.
And we have to sort of have the idea of hydrogen fuel cell versus burning hydrogen. And again, I think for homes, if we're moving more towards the electric side of things, we find get rid of people that's burning stuff, sometimes maybe well.
Yeah.
For that sort of area, you probably do want to go down the fuel cell route, which may be a little bit more efficient. But again, for like just making hydrogen again on a large commercial project, or you want to get things to really high temperature, then this is when you want to burn in the hydrogen.
So actually a lot of my work is more, although I have done a little bit on fuel cells, I've mainly worked on hydrogen combustion. And I'm quite for it. There are some issues, right? So the hydrogen,
get paid for it.
I get paid for it. So one of the things I would say, everyone thinks hydrogen is more dangerous than natural gas. Actually, in a lot of ways, in one key way, hydrogen is safer than natural gas in the house. Reason being that if you have a natural gas leak in your home, it pools in your house, can't go anywhere. Any sort of slight spark effect, or something will blow the house up. Hydrogen, as I say, it's very leaky. So generally, if it leaks, it'll go out your roof. Unless you've, again, lead-lined your roof or something, it's going out your roof. And hydrogen needs to get to 4% in air to be explosive. So unless you've got a very violent leak, exactly, you're not going to get to 4%, right? You'd have to really make some efforts to do that. So you're not going to get an explosive mixture. So all these stories you hear about, occasionally in the news, someone's house will blow up because of a natural gas leak. I think it happened a couple of years ago and took out the two houses next to it as well. That's right. It was near where I grew up actually. And so it does happen every now and again. That is much less likely than hydrogen.
You see it's a force of when you saw the images.
Yes. Yeah. So that is one key thing. There are some other things. So what my work actually was on mixing hydrogen with natural gas. And seeing whether we can get away with doing what we call a changeover to this hydrogen-enriched natural gas that doesn't require us to change all our infrastructure. So in the sort of 60s, 70s, there was this sort of worldwide changeover from what they call town gas, which was essentially a mixture of, it was largely hydrogen actually. It had a lot of carbon monoxide in it as well. Replacing that with natural gas, which had far less carbon monoxide. Reason being that people were dying from carbon monoxide poisoning because it had about 20%, 25% carbon monoxide in the fuel. So essentially people were switching that over. That cost a ridiculous amount of money, obviously, but it was led by the fact that people were dying in their homes. Now, we kind of want to avoid changing all the infrastructure again to go back to using a large concentration of hydrogen, just because it's so expensive.
I think this is one of the things we've had, particularly most. You have to change boilers, you have to change the pipe work, and so you have to change the distribution network and the tanks that hold it. One of the blending is
blending is a good stepping stone, I think. So I think the idea would be that you would get us, and this is what my work was on, can we put, say, 20-30% hydrogen in the natural gas line, keep all the infrastructure the same, so the end user wouldn't even notice that they've had this change. And then we'll gradually then phase out the boilers, the cookers, as they come to their natural lifespan, and introduce one that can be used either with this blend or pure hydrogen. So that rather than doing one big changeover, we're just doing a gradual changeover as things come to their natural lifespan. And that would be a lot cheaper and it spreads the cost out. So I think that's the idea. And the paper that I worked on showed that you can quite easily get to 30-40% hydrogen, natural gas, without anyone really noticing that you changed. In fact, they've done this in Britain. There's some test runs going with typically 20% hydrogen. There's a place up near Newcastle where they did a test run where they replaced, they told the residents at some point this year we're going to replace 20% of your natural gas with hydrogen, but they didn't tell them when they would do it, and they did it for about a week and they had no complaints. The worry was that if they told people when would be, they'd have all these complaints.
So basically, SIBO test or blind test.
In the blind test, yeah, no one noticed. And this is it. So again, hydrogen flames, pure hydrogen flames are invisible, so you would notice that. But when you just mix hydrogen into natural gas, you should get the same looking flames, right? You get these sort of blue with orange tips. As I say, if you had sodium in there, again, you get blue with orange tips from the sodium. But yeah, so that's the idea. And yeah, it works well. The only issue with hydrogen is it has got about a third less energy per molecule than natural gas does.
But the size of the molecule is much smaller.
Exactly, and this is important because there's something called the Bernoulli principle, where when you have if you've got a fixed pressure line, so we're not changing the pressure, it's changing the gas from natural gas to this blend. If you've got a lower density gas, it actually comes out of your port quicker. So essentially, what that means is you've got to keep pressures the same. You're actually getting more gas per second out of your nozzle.
Yes, that's gas fluid.
Exactly. So it's just a sort of fluid dynamics thing. And as it turns out that because hydrogen is about 9 times less dense than natural gas, the methane, it balances out. So butane, which is going to be twice as heavy again. Yeah, twice, but then it also has more energy output. So the study I was doing, at least, we were looking at methane hydrogen blends, and it turns out that when you actually take that into account, the energy per unit time is about the same. It's slightly lower, but it's not so much lower than that you can get away with it, essentially. So if you go into 30%, although you get slight energy reduction, it's not so significant that people will notice it. So okay, it will take slightly longer to cook your egg, yeah. But essentially not so much so that you would probably notice. We're not going from like a 20-minute cook to an hour. That's it.
And also, you actually saving money,
yeah,
by not having to basically, go to the North Sea,
drill
a hole, mine it, transport it. Like if you can produce your hydrogen,
if you produce it greenly, is that a word? Yeah, green, in a more green fashion. In more green fashion. I think this is the thing. So this is where we come into grey and blue hydrogen versus green hydrogen. If you're using grey hydrogen, it's made from natural gas, so it's always going to be more expensive than natural gas because you take your natural gas, you react it with steam at 1,000 degrees to produce your hydrogen. It's got an extra step, right? So it's going to be more expensive than just burning natural gas, isn't it? So this is where green hydrogen is coming in, and actually, although it's currently more expensive to use green hydrogen than grey hydrogen, I think it's about 3 times more expensive per litre of hydrogen. If you have carbon capture, that turns into blue hydrogen. So grey hydrogen is where you just essentially produce your hydrogen and natural gas and do nothing about the CO2 that's also produced because you produce hydrogen and CO2. Blue hydrogen is where you actually capture the CO2 and you have this extra cost to capture it. That's about half the price of green hydrogen. So green hydrogen is coming down in price though, and as I say, it can, in theory, cut below the price of natural gas. Blue and grey hydrogen never can because there's always got this extra step. Yeah. So that's where the future of green hydrogen, as long as we can get this efficiency up and the natural gas price will go up eventually anyway. So,
but also with the green hydrogen, it comes out of energy storage ideas as well.
Yes, yeah.
Because you can just store your energy in it because then you can just use your excess. So with the massive, we put a big wind farm off the coast somewhere, and you've got the water to supply it, so it means you've got that ability to distribute your energy back.
Exactly, it's about the geography way of putting it.
And also, there's no reason why you can't use your hydrogen to boil the water, to put through a steam turbine and just move it back there.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
So it's a very cyclic sort of motion or industry, but with like little loops that you can do.
And there's some interesting ideas with electrolyzers coming out as well. We talk about normal electrolyzers where you do hydrogen and oxygen together and you have this filtering problem of not mixing them together. You have to separate the two. There's something called decoupled water splitting where you actually do the hydrogen reduction and the oxygen reduction at different sites and at different times. Essentially what you do is you couple the hydrogen reaction with another reaction that can balance the current, and then you couple the oxygen reaction with another reaction. So it means you can actually produce your hydrogen and oxygen at different times in different places.
So you have to only have to export an oxygen-rich compound somewhere.
You can make it cyclical, right? So you can essentially have a redox reaction where it goes one way when you're producing oxygen, and then you can drive it the other way to regenerate what you started with. So you can make it cyclical on site. But it's got the advantage you never have this gas mixing. It also means that you can produce your one of the examples I saw of this is where they essentially had a big solar farm with the oxygen side. So essentially they were just releasing oxygen into the air at the solar farm. And then when they wanted to, then they were producing hydrogen at a completely different site. Because again, you want to be using hydrogen somewhere where you can manage it more easily and have the storage in place and things, and potentially have it on site at the factory that you were talking about. So that's, yeah.
So if you want to have a read of this paper, so this was published in January 2020, and it was published in the Sustainable Energy and Fuels. It's called the Hydrogen-enriched Natural Gas of Domestic Fuel, an analysis based on flashback and blow-off limits of domestic natural gas appliances within the UK.
I like the long name.
You do?
It's not very snazzy, is it?
No. But yeah, in this paper, obviously Dan compares different hydrogen enrichment techniques
it was actually looking at essentially when we put increasing amounts of hydrogen into natural gas, how do we affect the stability? So there's two different stability limits for any fuel. One is called blow up. So one of the big problems with natural gas and now sort of and butane, propane, all the same problem. If your boiler or your cooker isn't working at its optimum settings, typically, for example, if it's putting too much air into the fuel, what will happen is it'll blow the flame out. So as soon as you try and turn your cooker on, the flame blows itself out. So that's called blowout, actually, and it's called lean blowout. It happens because there's too much air in your fuel. You can get the bit before that, it's called blow up, you see the flame move away from the port. So typically blow up will lead to blowout. The opposite regime is flashback. So that's the super dangerous one, where the flame will actually go the other way. So rather than blowing off the port, it goes into the port, and eventually it can flash all the way back and blow up the supply because it drags air in behind it. Now, natural gas is very susceptible to blow up. It's less susceptible to flashback than hydrogen. So hydrogen is basically protected against blow off. It's very hard to blow up a hydrogen flame. But to essentially you put as much air as you want, it won't blow out. But it is much more likely to flash back, and that's what limits putting 100% hydrogen into our current cooker. If you put 100% hydrogen into our current infrastructure, it would be liable to flash back. So essentially you would turn the cooker on and it would flash back into the line. It may not get all the way back into the supply because it needs to be able to drag enough air in to keep burning. And you typically have a flashback arrestor which stops it getting beyond that. But you wouldn't then be able to use your cooker because the flashback arrestor essentially is ceramic where the flame goes in and fuses it all. Okay. So then you have to replace that whole unit. So essentially you won't be able to use your cooker anymore. It basically disables everything. But you are right, it stops it blowing the house up or so you need it. But this is why we have to change the infrastructure. We essentially have to make the ports smaller. So if you look in your cooker, you've got big holes for the flames to come out. Essentially, you'd have to make those smaller so that when if it were to, essentially by making the holes smaller, it dissipates energy into the walls of the port more efficiently. So it makes it harder for it to flash back. That makes sense. So that's what we'd have to do. So we'd have to make everything smaller.
Yeah. Now we come on to Dan's third paper. So this was actually first authored by the Prees, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Stefanos de Prees, who's a South African who came to work with us for a little bit.
So this was in the Journal of, again, Hydrogen Energy. And where's the date gone? Up there, 2020 as well.
Yeah.
And this paper, again, there'll be links down below if you want to read it, is firmly stable PTTI mesh catalytic or catalytic hydrogen combustion. So I think this is the next step on when you are burning hydrogen, you are effectively just combining with oxygen.
Exactly, yeah. So that's the key. So that's the key thing. So hydrogen, as you may well know, doesn't produce any CO2. It just reacts with oxygen, produces water. So that's why everyone wants to use it. Now, the one caveat with that is hydrogen typically, as well as having an invisible flame, which we discussed, safety issue, also burns at a slightly higher temperature than natural gas, propane, things like that. Not huge, but it's 100, 200 degrees hotter. And at those temperatures, for every degree you increase, you get an exponential increase in the amount of what we call NOx. So at these sort of temperatures above 900 degrees, 1000 degrees, nitrogen in the air will react with oxygen in the air and produce these NOx gases, which are not very good for your health. They, as if you've got asthma, are not very good for that. But also, they are greenhouse gases. They tend to often be indirect greenhouse gases, which means that they aren't, unlike CO2, which is a greenhouse gas in itself, it's more that they go off and react with other things to produce greenhouse gases. And actually, they're quite damaging. So NOxes are actually much worse greenhouse gases. I think I saw something like 200 times, 400 times worse than CO2.
But yeah, they change the albedo of the planet.
Yeah, so they're not.
So they're reflected in gases.
Yeah, things. I think it's more to do with the amount of greenhouse gases they result in when they go up in the atmosphere. So we want to avoid NOxes. And the problem is because hydrogen burns hotter, it produces more NOx.
Yeah.
It basically increases the rate at which nitrogen and oxygen reacts with each other to produce NOx. So that's a problem for hydrogen flames, and it can be controlled by essentially putting more air in. So what they normally do is, especially if you're doing like a hydrogen engine, for example, what you do is you put loads of air into it. So you're essentially diluting the flame. Essentially, there's less energy being produced per volume. So you're limiting your energy expense so that you can get the temperature down, and you can do that because, as I say, hydrogen is not prone to blow out, so you can put loads of air in and still get the flame to function properly. Now, the other alternative, but that does limit your energy density, so that's one of the issues with that. Now, the advantage of catalytic hydrogen combustion, which is what this paper is about, is essentially what you're doing is you're passing your hydrogen over a heated mesh, and it's not heated too much. We were getting whatever, like 50 degrees. You just heat it a little bit to get the reaction going. This mesh will normally be made of platinum or something with platinum on it. Again, platinum is made with hydrogen catalyst. And essentially what happens is, as the hydrogen hits the catalyst, it reacts with oxygen on the surface of the catalyst. So it's a surface reaction on the catalyst. So you actually get your flame, if you want to call it that, right at the surface of the catalyst. It's not your standard sort of conical flame. It is a layer of flame in a sense, because it's only reacting at that surface.
Oh, that's a layer of plasma.
It's a layer of plasma, really, yeah. They often call it a flameless reaction. It depends what you really mean by a flame. A flame is normally a homogeneous reaction. That means that you get this plasma everywhere in the volume that's reacting. Because it's at a surface, it's called a heterogeneous reaction. It's not your typical flame. And the key advantage of this is you can actually control the temperature of that reaction by the flow rates of the flow rate of hydrogen and the flow rate of air that you might be passing in as well. So you can actually ramp up and down the temperatures by changing the flow rates. And also, because it's a mesh and you're acting on the surface, you don't have issues with flashback in the same way. Because essentially you've got your hydrogen reacting at the surface. You don't have the same physics that cause flashback that you would get with exactly, and you can have other meshes in the way as well to essentially dissipate any flash that could happen. So you can bring the temperature of the flame down to sort of 600 degrees, which is below the NOx onset temperature. So you can essentially, in theory, eliminate NOx and operate it essentially. What they often do with the catalytic burners, they have their reacting mesh, and then on top of that, they have a metal hull. So essentially, to the user, it would be a bit like using an electric hull. It's just heated from underneath by this hydrogen reaction, essentially. And again, you can ramp up and down the temperature then with your hydrogen flow rate.
The back one just died.
Oh,
Good thing we're using this one as the main one.
that's good.
But check out it's all. Yep, that's still
The wrong one.
still.
I forgot we were using that one anyway. I was really looking at this one.
Yeah, so it's what you're always doing then. You're just trying to make a layer, and also, first from the point of view of catalysts, you're always trying to increase the surface area. So
Yes.
if your flame's not going upwards, you can have another layer close by on top as well.
So What do you mean?
So
So
instead of having just one mesh.
oh, if
you
you
have
have multiple meshes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can change the geometry to suit your, yeah, exactly. So this is where all the science comes in. So this paper is actually, can we get an efficient reaction minimizing the amount of platinum? So I think we were using platinum, but we were sort of depositing in small amounts on the top of a titanium mesh. Titanium is obviously a lot cheaper because again, we want to minimize the cost of this. If we've got an expensive catalytic hydrogen burner, in a way, you might as well just use an electric hob. So there are some. We want to bring it down to the point we can use hydrogen and make it competitive with an electric system.
Yeah. So where do you, because obviously you burn, you're trying to extract heat energy. So I suppose then you just need a sort of heat exchange around it, or you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what I mean. So you have your sort of heat exchanger, and eventually it will just end up being a flat metal hob, like you would have a ceramic hob, like you have in your normal electric, cooktop hob. But yeah, you can adjust the geometry to the situation you want. So you might want to have a heat exchanger that comes into a cylinder or whatever. It depends what you're doing it for, I suppose.
I suppose most efficient one would be to make it like a capacitor where you have a cylinder where your oil or and then your oil you heat.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's obviously more efficient ways to exchange heat. You could even have it directly heat some water flowing and have a water flow if you were trying to do like for a boiler system to heat your home, central heating, So it depends what you're using it for, I think.
So hopefully that's explained a bit about just sort of like the cycle of hydrogen.
Yes, yeah.
Obviously you've got a lot more papers on this.
Yeah, I mainly worked on the electrolysis, so that's the production and the end use combustion. The other sort of typical ones that research a lot are fuel cells. Again, we haven't talked about that, but essentially a fuel cell is a little bit like electrolyte run in reverse to produce power. So we haven't talked much about that. I haven't done so much work on that myself. And then there's also the bit between the storage and transport, which is its own kettle of fish. There's a lot of issues with that as well, which we don't go into, but we touched on it a little bit. But yeah,
basically giant balloons of storage.
Exactly, pressurizing it. There are talks about one way I've seen of avoiding having to pressurize the hydrogen is to essentially convert it into ammonia. So you essentially react it to form ammonia, which you then transport as a liquid. Essentially, yeah, you should do that, and you essentially then you can transport your liquid ammonia, which is much easier to transport because you don't have to have pressurized cylinders. You can transport much like you would a petrol thing. Of course, ammonia is horribly corrosive, so this has got its own issues. If you were to crash a ammonia tanker, you've got big issues there. But it has got the advantage of transport. You lose energy doing all this, but then you also lose energy with compression of hydrogen. So there's a bit of a balance.
Half process is like 400 to 450 degrees.
Yeah, exactly. So there are issues with that, obviously, and it's more to do with the fact that the ease of transport of it. There are also ways of storing hydrogen in a solid in a zeolite, such that it's not in gaseous form anymore. It's essentially, I always compare it to dynamite, right? So dynamite is a way of stabilizing, probably not the best thing to say because everyone thinks explosion, but essentially dynamite is a way of stabilizing nitroglycerin. So if you have nitroglycerin on its own, liquid, it's a contact explosive. So if you shake it at all, it will blow up. It's really reactive. There were huge numbers of accidents before Nobel invented dynamite because they used to use it for mining and things. Then dynamite, essentially what Alfred Nobel did is he stabilized nitroglycerin in a clay that he called dynamite, and essentially it makes it much more safe. Everything's dynamite's a horrible thing, but you only blow up a stick of dynamite when you light it, right? If I can throw it about, I can shake it, it's not blowing up. So in a way, the idea of the zeolite is you can actually use a voltage to cause the hydrogen to enter the zeolite as ions. And the zeolite itself is really safe, right? You can throw it about, you can set fire, well, maybe not set fire, but you can do things to it.
It forms a absorbent air, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it sticks to the surface and it's not reactive in the same way hydrogen is. So it's only then when you choose to get the hydrogen out, again, by applying voltage.
Or even a small amount of heat.
Or small, exactly, so heat's another. Essentially, you can choose your way of triggering the hydrogen come out. So you can transport this solid block and then at the other end, just extract it out again as the gas that you want. And then you can extract it as you need it. Then you don't need to store it as gas at any point. You just essentially say, I need a bit of hydrogen. Or heat it a little bit, like you say, or higher voltage, and it comes. So that's the disadvantage of that is the energy density. You can't store as much because it would have this extra weight of zeolite that you need to have in there, or your whatever the solid is. But yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah. So what proportion we want to now, because where the time is
sorry.
is batteries.
Yes, batteries, which is what I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, so more recent research.
More recent.
Let's get the wipe out. One reason why I want to do these podcasts and the reason why we're talking about research is because there's a lot of research being done all the time, but most of it will never see the light of day. Most of it won't even get published, let alone to the point then where it can then be applied to industry and a patent made and then scaled up and tested and all this kind of thing. And part of that is just because the research carried out at university, you are on short-term contracts. So you have a project, you might be making good headway on it, and then the funding runs out, or people move and get promoted, and it suddenly disappears. And now it happens an awful lot. Yeah. So you'll find that researchers tend to move to different areas. So batteries is your area.
Well, actually, supercapacitors is what I work on at the moment, which the way to think of a supercapacitor is essentially it's a battery where the reactions only happen at the surface of the material, the electron material. So because of that, the reactions are quicker to happen. So because they're quicker, the reactions, power reactions of the battery are much slower, more sluggish. It can produce a lot more power, and it can source and sink a lot more power than a battery with equivalent size, but the energy density is a lot lower because it's only restoring energy at the surface of the material.
There's an idea like surface area is obviously less than volume.
Yes.
But in the battery, you're relying on that chemical reaction.
It's changing the whole electrode material. Yeah.
And then you drift your electrons out of this bulk material. So it's like having a glass like this. Your atoms are moving around in there, but you can only pull sort of one out at a time. If it was all pure surface, then all the electrons can move at once, which is what happens when you have evaporation. Why it will take ages for the water to evaporate out of this, although if I spot it all over this table, then there is one layer thick.
It's got a huge surface area.
And
that's it. So with a supercapacitor, you're maximising surface area because that really determines the power you can achieve. So that's essentially it. And again, the amount, and also so is the capacity of the capacitance, so if your supercapacitor, because the more surface area, the more you can store as well. So,
and also it's the idea that you can charge it quicker as well. You can discharge it's in a charge.
So this is it, and people compare supercapacitors with batteries because they often see them as competing technologies. They're not competing technologies. They're complement. They're meant to be used together. So the classic example, your Tesla car, your electric car. Essentially, if you're traveling down the motorway at constant speed, you rely on your battery to provide that huge energy density that you need. Because you're essentially not having to put a lot of power in to keep it going at that speed. If you suddenly need to accelerate, though, you need that burst of power. Your battery struggles with that. So what you then do is you essentially use your supercapacitor to provide that burst of power. The supercapacitor can't provide that power for long, but it can provide it for long enough that you can get that acceleration, and then it's depleted, and then you can then recharge it with your battery. But supercapacitor is also much more cyclable. So a battery can do maximum a few thousand full cycles. The aim for this 10,000 number. But a supercapacitor can do millions.
I suppose there's no degradation to it, is there?
Exactly, it's only on the surface. You do have degradation, but you can achieve much better cyclability. It's typically hundreds of thousands to millions of cycles.
That's the way you think about it is, if you damage something in the middle of your bulb or that suddenly that influences everything around it and forces any electrons trying to get through it.
And it's the expansion as well. So when you charge and discharge a battery, it physically expands the materials. And you don't get that with a supercap because it's only on the surface.
I suppose that's one of the major problems with the silicon as acting as the anode, that expands massively when so then it starts getting shearing forces.
And when you use graphite, similarly, you're shoving ions into the graphite, and moving the layers apart. This is part of the problem.
Yeah. So they're often, this is like it's side, but they're often cool technologies that people are trying to do that. Trying to make like a graphene corset that goes around your
yeah, that's quite a cool idea. Yeah, and holding it together. And yeah, and I think also the electrolytes, you have issues with batteries as well, the degradation of the electrolytes into this. So
yeah, there's an inefficiency in every process, but whenever you're doing chemistry, chemistry is basically a statistical process, isn't it? So there's always going to be some that don't.
There's always reversible in irreversible reactions, and in a what they call secondary battery, so recharge battery. Typically, you want everything to be reversible, don't you? To get so you can do it, cycle it over and over and over again. You always have some irreversibilities. There's always something that reacts and doesn't go back to what it was, and this is why it degrades.
When you get more and more complex battery chemistries.
Yes.
When it was just a simple like I don't know vinegar, copper, and there's not much really that you can change in your chemistry there. But as soon as you start getting up to lithium iron phosphate, you get a different.
The complexity comes from the fact you want it to recharge as well. Like a primary battery where you literally charge it all up and then you use it once, and once it's dead, you replace it. There's more chemistries open to you because you don't need this reversibility. You don't need to be able to shuttle the lithium ions back and forth.
So when the lithium ions do go back to when you charge it, they don't go back. They may go back to exactly the same point.
Exactly, they might go back, and the surface degrades, and you get unwanted deposition in lithium-ion batteries. So you want to avoid plating of lithium. You want your lithium ions to go in and out of these two materials, essentially shuttle back and forth. But if you get it wrong, what they do is they actually plate on the anode and form what they call it. Ideally, if they do plate, you want to plate sort of uniformly, but over time, you start to get what they call dendrites, which essentially means the lithium grows in these little dendrites, which eventually can short circuit the whole battery and cause fires and all sorts.
So basically, like a nucleation seed for a crystal.
Exactly, yeah. And that's one of the key. So a lot of research in batteries goes into what they call it the solid electrolyte interface. It's essentially the where you've got your anodes, your carbon and a silicon material. And you've got your electrolyte. Essentially, you form a layer between the two, and you control the chemistry of the electrolyte and the electrode such that you get the layer you want. And this layer basically forces the lithium to grow if it is going to seed and plate to seed in the right area. So it's a uniform film. It's not forming these big dendrites, and it also protects the electrolyte from degrading as well as SEI. This SEI is one of the key parts of our research. And
also we've got another paper from Dan to probably just finish off this interview with. So again, this is a reasonably recent paper.
This was my most recent paper, actually. I think it was last year.
2023. It's chemical electro.
Electrochem. They got these fun names.
So this is, oh God, here we go. Again, long title. Scalable synthesis of pre-intercalated manganese 3,4 oxide nanostructures for supercapacitors, electrodes. Keeps going. Electrochemistry comparison of
Birnessite and Cryptomelane products. So it sounds very complicated, but essentially all I was doing here is for a supercapacitor. So this isn't a battery. This is where we're just looking at the surface reactions. What we're doing is we've taken our material, so it's something called manganese oxide, MnO2, is pristine manganese oxide, and we're essentially taking sodium ions or potassium ions, I was also doing in this case, and then inserting them into the material essentially. And when the sodium ion comes in, it changes the oxidation state of the manganese, because manganese can go 3+ or 4+, and it means it's a way of essentially storing the sodium or potassium inside the material. So this is what we call a pseudo-capacitive material. Now, you may remember from school, or if you're in the industry, capacitors, classic capacitors, what they do is ions come along, so classic supercapacitor, ions come along, they sit against the surface of your material, and then the charge is balanced by an electron that comes in. And essentially, there's no charge exchange. There's no electrons going from electrolytes to the electrode. Exactly. So it's only coming along and it's just ions shuttling back and forth, but they're not actually reacting with anything. That's what they call a capacitive material. A pseudocapacitor is slightly different because a pseudocapacitor actually, when the ion comes along, it does exchange electrons with the material like a battery would. But the reason it's different to a battery is it only happens at the surface and it's really quick. So although it is a redox process, you might think that's more like a battery-like process. It's not limited by diffusion. And when you do the testing, the actual power in, power out, and things like this that you get are more, they look more like a capacitor. So as you charge this material up, the voltage changes as you put more and more current in. That doesn't happen with a battery. A battery will always charge at one single voltage. So this is why we call it behaves like a capacitor, even though we've got these reactions happening. This is why we've got pseudocapacitor. And this is what manganese oxide is. And essentially what I was doing is I was changing the synthesis approach of manganese oxide so that I changed the different crystal structure. So I had a Birnessite crystal structure, which is a layered structure, and a Cryptomelane crystal structure has more like tunnels, tunnel-like channels, and seeing how that affected the performance of the material effectively. And the Birnessite, because it's got these bigger, the channels are two-dimensional and they're bigger, essentially it's easier for the ions to come in and out than it is in these narrow channels in the Cryptomelane, which is the tighter structure, if that makes sense. And then looking at routine sodium and potassium as well. Sodium and potassium, incidentally, are one of the differences between lithium ion and sodium ion. We haven't really discussed the differences so much, but in my new company, I'll be working with sodium ion stuff. So sodium ions have the problem that they're bigger than lithium ions. And they're even bigger again when you take into account the electrolyte molecules surrounding them. They call that the solvation of the ion. So that makes them more sluggish. It makes they diffuse more slowly. So inherently you would get a slower, less power, if you will.
So the idea for basically batteries, which you want to store a large amount of energy in, but releases very slowly, so you don't without sudden spikes.
But it means you're inherently going to limit your you're limiting the rate that you can run your process at, because the ions have got to get through these channels and they're bigger, and also it limits your energy density because sodium ion is much more massive. It's about 3 times more massive than lithium ion. Essentially, if you're storing a sodium ion, you've already got 3 times the weight for that ion being stored. So the energy density is going to be lower than lithium. So there are some disadvantages. I mentioned before, sodium ion has the advantage that it's sodium ion batteries advantages they're safer than lithium ion. They're less susceptible to thermal runaway. So that's one advantage. They can also be discharged to 0 volts. I don't know if you know that about this, but lithium ions batteries are never completely discharged. You can't do it to it damages the battery.
They're like as you know, again, for those regular viewers, I've got that 5 kilowatt hour pure drive battery, and that only ever discharges down to 10% showing. I'm assuming that's much more than what.
Exactly. It's interesting because with a battery, unlike a supercapacitor, most of the charge storage happens at 1 voltage. So if you're within this sort of acceptable voltage range, you're maintaining the voltage. It's only when you get to like really low states of charge that the actual voltage drops. And if it drops too much, say if it were to go to 0 volts, the problem is that in a lithium-ion battery you have to use copper as the backing for your lithium to go onto and materials to sit on. The reason being that lithium alloys with aluminium, so you can't use aluminium, at least for the cathode. You have to use copper. If you go to 0 volts, copper oxidizes. And it eventually stops. It has this resistance that stops your battery working. Sodium ion doesn't have this problem, so you can actually use aluminium for both electrodes, which means you can actually discharge it all the way to 0 volts. That's really good for transport then, because you can actually transport these batteries completely discharged.
I don't know much about commercial batteries, but things like Give Energy, they claim you can discharge their lithium ion batteries down to 0%. There's a better one.
Yeah, exactly. It does. It feels. It's more to do with the fact that the voltage of your two electrodes, your say graphite and your lithium stored cathode material will equilibrate. You can't do that in lithium ion, but you can in a sodium ion. So there are some advantages to sodium ion. And yeah, in theory,
plenty of like a big area to store it in. So it's perfect for sort of house and electrical storage. Not so good for cars, but that's the whole point of it, to try and lithium is always going to be in limited supply. Sodium is always in, except
this is the key thing with sodium ion, is the sustainability aspect of it. So they've estimated that lithium will run out at current rate before the end of the century. I think they've given us about 60, 65 years at the current, and it obviously could increase, especially with our electric cars. So we're going to run out of lithium, and it's only really found in certain places, like China, for example. They have a bit of a monopoly on it. Sodium is everywhere, in seawater, so we can just get. I think it's the fourth most common element on Earth in the crust. So it's something like that. It's one of the top anyway. After things like hydrogen, oxygen, carbon. It's certainly up there anyway. It's fourth or fifth, I forget. But it's very abundant. Anyone can get it. It's not geographically dependent. As long as you've got some seawater, you can find it.
Those land countries.
Exactly. But I mean, you can get your sodium, can't you? Yeah. So abundance. And the other thing is, it's not just the sodium and the lithium you have to worry about. It's the electromaterials. So lithium typically requires nickel and cobalt for its cathode materials. You can make them without, but they are the best ones. Even one of the other common examples that doesn't use nickel or cobalt is LFP, lithium iron phosphate. But even that, you think, okay, iron and phosphorus are abundant, but phosphorus is used so heavily as fertilizer that actually you're competing with the fertilizer industry. So it's generally best to avoid that. So sodium, you can actually get away with much more abundant things like manganese, like iron, that you generally can't use as much with lithium, just because of the way that sodium interpolates into the material as a bigger ion. In this case, actually, the size of the iron helps us with the materials we can choose.
This again something I'm not much an expert on, but the idea that the solid state batteries coming on.
Yes, yeah.
So doesn't sodium work with solid state?
Yes.
That's basically the electrolyte instead of being a liquid.
And it helps with stability, solid state. So typically with a battery, you need, again, a membrane a separator between the two electrodes to stop the short circuiting. But like we mentioned before, dendrites, these dendrites can grow and puncture the membrane, short circuit everything. With a function separator, I should say. With solid state, you don't have this problem because it's a solid electrolyte, so it doesn't force its way through in the same way. And you can increase things like energy density.
Yeah, well, 4 times energy density.
Exactly,
You combine that with a silicon electrode, which is also 4 times more energy.
There's a lot of wasted space in the liquid electrolyte. There's a lot of solvent going about. It's not really doing much.
I suppose it's one of those. Just to probably just wrap up. Is if you're on Facebook, you see a lot of people who are sort of very anti-EV or anti-EV, but then they'll play the arguments of, but something like a lithium battery uses cobalt. Cobalt's been used in the petrochemical industry. That's for the past 80 years or whatever. It's but lithium requires a huge amount of mining. Yes, but the lithium technology have now moved into the sodium facilitated that.
And actually this provided a template for sodium. So there are differences in sodium and lithium, but basically the basic structures are the same. A lot of the solvents are equivalent solvents. So, you're just changing a lithium ion to a sodium ion, but otherwise it's the same. So in a way, we've given ourselves a head start with sodium ion. Lithium ion has superseded sodium. The reason people focus on lithium ion ahead of sodium ion is because you can get better energy density, you get better voltages. You can actually, in theory, you can get better power with sodium ion because of the fact it's less prone to thermal runaway. So you can actually, in theory, when we're talking about fast charging and stuff like this, sodium ion actually could facilitate this to some degree because we can basically check loads of power and not worry about the thermal runaway of the battery. It's much more temperature resilient than lithium ion is. So there are advantages to it. But again, we're going to be forced into it interlook-industry now because of the lithium running out.
Yeah.
At the scale that we're looking to produce batteries at, you know.
Yes, that's it's that one thing that nothing is ever green, hence the title.
Yes,
Everything is black and white except because nothing is 100% green. Every activity that has some sort of cost, but it's that thing. Can we move to a lower?
And there's no silver bullet. We want to combine all these solutions.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going to do everything with batteries, not going to do everything with hydrogen, but if we can use them for what they're good at.
Yeah. Supercapacitors, combining everything together. So whether you have just separation of hydrogen, where you need to burn it, where you need to put it into a fuel cell, uses a fuel cell, that can then go into storing in the battery as well. Or
exactly. Yeah, it's going to be a combination of solutions, I think, is where we.
It's one of those things like everybody will want to know what's the one bin that's going. It's not going to be one bin.
No. There'll be one thing, don't be wrong. You know, we're probably going to be dominated by electric vehicles rather than hydrogen vehicles, and other than for long haul, where we discussed at the start. But you know, I think you never really want to rely on one thing. Ultimately, it's much safer, much more. You get better security, energy security if you're relying on lots of things, right?
Well, that's one of the things that came around with the ice, the petrol.
Yeah.
As soon as you had the Ukraine war, prices you were dependent on.
We were struggling.
Luckily, you had electric vehicles just starting to come in at that point and use, but it can cause real issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, so first of all, I would like to thank you all for watching or listening, and well done if you managed to get all the way to the end of this. If this is on the podcast, it's probably a very long commute. I want to really thank Dan for coming on and agreeing to be my inaugural guest on this.
Thank you.
Might get him on again in the future.
When I started in this company,
What we're going off now is to burn some natural gas cooking some burgers. We'll catch you again in another podcast very soon.